This movie, look, I was there and I was 15, and watching the movie, watching this movie and the other movies, I saw things that I didn't know happened when I was there. They weren't exactly street signs, so we thought if we left the people we were with, we would never see them again. And so I didn't know that people were swimming, and I didn't know that the hog farm was there, and it still was a great time. There was the Atlantic City Pop Festival, and then Janis Joplin was there, and she was great. And at the end of the festival, the guy on the stage said, "And who's going to Woodstock in 2 weeks?" And we all went, "Yeah, we're going." And we didn't even know what Woodstock was, but we were going.
What a summer, jeez.
So right here, yeah.
There's another documentary called Woodstock Then and Now, which is similar to your documentary, and I assume that you're familiar with it. So I was just wondering what your thinking is, considering there was that documentary and other documentaries.
Well, I wouldn't say it's that similar. Yeah. There have been 2 or 3. The problem with those documentaries, not that there's anything wrong with the filmmaking, is just that they didn't have the access to the archive. You know, we got this archive, so we could tell the story in a way that it hasn't been told before. I know there was a film, is that the film done by, whatever, I think I've seen it. But regardless, this was an opportunity that nobody had before, and not for anything I did, but because of the patient work at WGBH to get Warner Brothers to let us have the footage. In the end, the one thing they wouldn't let us do is show performances. So we had a very strict minutes limit on what we could show of performances in music. So you saw a lot of times we would start a performance, we'd have to stop it, you know, we'd have to talk over it. I regret that, but there was really no way around it. They were just very adamant that, you know, the performances are what we own and we're going to continue to own. You can have all this boring stuff that happens out in the crowd.
Real quick, the Jimi Hendrix performance seemed like that was one of the longer clips. How did you end up choosing to show as much of that as you did, and at what point did you realize, you know, this is a key moment that ties this festival back to Vietnam, for instance?
I mean, right away. I mean, that is the seminal performance of Woodstock, in my opinion. I mean, there were a few other notable performances and some very bad ones, but that was the one that I think transcended the festival. And as you say, and the irony there is that, you know, there's so many great stories, but Hendrix was the one performer who really, really drove a hard bargain as far as his fee goes. Like, he wasn't going to perform. Everyone got a certain amount. He got double what everybody else got. He was the big star at the time. And the only way they could pay him double, because it was a most favored nation thing, was to have him go on twice. But it ended up that the festival was so late, everything was late, that he ended up playing, as you saw, in front of 35,000 people, whereas everyone else played in front of 450,000 people. So, you know, it kind of turned on him. I mean, it was a career-making thing for many of these acts. But for Hendrix, it was completely the opposite. Although he did this amazing thing, he did it in front of a very sparse crowd.
Right here. Yes.
These other people say they were at Woodstock, but do they have the original ticket? I don't think so.
What else you got?
The other thing, I have a couple other things, but the thing that I'm most proud of, and your film has helped me quite a bit, is at the end of the concert, you saw the scene with all the trash and everything. So my friend who was on the cleanup crew, there was a large sign that said Aquarian Expo with an arrow pointing to Max Gassier's farm. He picked it up during his pickup truck, brought it back to me, living at that time in New York City. I kept it in my attic for 40 years, and at the 40th anniversary of Woodstock, I donated it to on the site now, there's a museum and performing arts center. And the Bethel Woods Museum now has my saved sign for 40 years on a permanent exhibit at the museum. But the kicker is, I've never been able to show them because there was no cell phones at the time, so I did have to believe. But in your film, my sign is there.
Really?
So the proof is in, people.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Did you in addition to going to Warner Brothers, did you talk with anyone who was involved in the original documentary? I mean, most famously, Scorsese was one of the cameramen.
Besides talking and working with Warner Brothers, did you speak to any of the original filmmakers of Woodstock, or Scorsese, for instance, who was one of the camera people?
We briefly thought about including some of the story of the making of that film in our film. We didn't end up doing that, but we are in pretty close touch with one of the producers, a guy named Dale Bell, who lives out in LA. He was one of the producers, and we know the story very well. It's a great story. Not Scorsese, or Thelma Schoonmaker, who cut the film. It was her first ever film. Michael Wadley was the director. He's living somewhere, I think, in New Mexico. We didn't get in touch with him, but we have talked to a couple of the camera people just to see what their experience was like. One of them still shoots in New York a lot for people like me all the time. It's a really extraordinary thing that they did.
Yeah, we were driving around upper state New York one time, maybe, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago, and we got to Woodstock, New York. So, you know, we asked the residents, so where did the festival take place? And it was an artsy town, etc. And I was really surprised nobody really knew. They said, well, it wasn't here, it was somewhere out there, and we never did find it. But, so my question is, there is now a museum or a monument? I heard reference to it here.
It's a wonderful museum. I highly recommend it. And it's right on the site. They also have concerts there all the time, big concerts. Someone bought it from Max Yasgur's family and refurbished it and has kept it pristine. And it's really a fun outing. I mean, in many ways, it's like our film in that it does the whole story of the '60s as well as it can do, and then brings you through the festival itself with all sorts of memorabilia.
What's the name of the town?
Well, Bethel Woods is the location. There's White Lake is the town nearby. Bethel Woods Performing Arts Center is where you want to look up. It's really fun.
Road trip? Talk a bit about Max Yasgur real quick, and what material you found about him, and just anything you can share about Max.
So we decided early on that Max was our moral center of our film, and I mean, that's not a great insight. A lot of people have, raised him up as the great hero of Woodstock, and he was a very interesting guy. He was younger than he looks in the film. He was in his early to mid 40s at the time. He only lived a few years after this. He had a series of bad heart attacks before this happened, and actually usually had an oxygen tank with him when he walked. But he was the kind of guy you don't mess with. So when he decided that he was going to allow these kids to use his farm, that was it. It didn't matter what anyone else said, that was it. And I just learned this from Joel Rosenman, that the great story about him is that afterwards, as I said, he was sort of a pariah up there in upstate New York for a few years. People didn't talk to him much, but parents with kids who were troubled would call him and say, could I send my kid over for a talk? He became such a kind of icon to the sort of younger generation that they respected anything he said. So he ended up having these like sessions with troubled kids where he would just sort of talk to them and kind of guide them. And it was apparently hugely gratifying to him to be in that role. So that was the way he spent his last few years.
Oh, yes, I want to know, how long did it take you to complete the film?
How long did it take you to make the film?
About 2 years. No, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talking about the museum, they actually are going to have Santana on the 50th anniversary.
Oh, cool.
So that would be a good time.
That would be great. She's had her hand up.
I briefly saw an in memoriam or a memory too in your credit, in the credits.
Gosh, now you're going to test my memory.
I was wondering if it was something private or if it was something
It's not
significant.
private. I'm trying to remember what that is.
A memory to, in memory of, dedicated to.
I honestly don't remember.
Your editors.
You challenged
your editors.
My editor
slipped that in.
slipped it in. I don't remember what that is.
Yeah. Probably have time for one more. Somebody wants to.